Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of What a Hell of a Way to Dad. It is Francis, and back with me, once again, a gentleman that I have not had on for a little bit, and the perfect man to talk about manliness, Jasper Craven. Jasper, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing great. This is good. We're both manly men. We're going to be talking about gender in the military and how it's just out of control. We just have real out of control gender happening all over the military. So you wrote a book that takes us through kind of this thoroughput from George Washington up until today about manliness in the military. And so I think my first question for you, Jasper, is give your background, because you're not in the military, but you have done a lot of writing and books and reporting on the military. So let's talk about your military background first.
Yeah, sure. Well, I am a bit of an odd duck. I'm sort of the inverse of the hard-edged son of a hard-boiled colonel. I'm the hippy-dippy flower child of a former peacenik during the anti-war movement in Vietnam. So my dad was deeply involved in the movement to end the war, and, he very explicitly tried to raise a boy who would never join the military. No video games, no television, no violent movies. He spent many dinner table conversations railing against, Nixon and Kissinger and William Westmoreland and all the rest. So, certainly there were points in my life where I was always really interested in military culture and military history. I think just partly as some minor rebellion against my father. I never fell in love with military service or seriously considered it. But, like any boy.
You never saw yourself outside a recruiting station going, maybe I could do it.
I certainly felt some deep yearning or need to be strong and kind of badass. I think I got sort of caught up in those ideas to some degree.
Every 16-year-old does.
Yeah.
That is certainly a part of it, is the idea of, well, I know what's a crucible that I can go through, and it's the military.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's one of those, I think every male in America and maybe, around the world toys with it at least a little bit. And many of them rightfully say, nah, it's not for me. I'm not going to do something like that. But then, there's that 1% of dummies that find themselves at the recruiting station. It's interesting because I had my father, and really my father's entire family, all of his brothers and sisters are a rainbow of political ideas. And my father fell squarely on democratic socialist kind of politics. If I was going to put him into any square there, but he and my mom, because my older brother was in the army and my father was in the army, and all of our, all the men in the family had joined the army. But it wasn't we all joined the army. We're a military family. You should join the military and carry this tradition on. It was just, at some point in time, we all did a stint in the military. You don't have to, though. My brother certainly would give me shit about it because he's my older brother, but nobody else really cared. But when I joined the army, it was, kind of all right, good job. And I want to say also, I joined the army before 9/11. So had it been a year later in birth and not been able to join, I think things would have ended up a little bit different. But, naivete is a motherfucker at the age of 17.
Absolutely. And that's part of, I deal with that a lot in the book. A lot of kids, and I really think when you sign up 17, 18, you are still a child. And I think often people join the military because they hold very pure and lofty, but also kind of naive ideas about what the military is like and sort of the values that it upholds. And, there's a certain romance attached to that decision. There's a million other reasons why men join the military. And, I don't want to discount any of those. I think many people are looking for community, economic opportunity to escape,
escape Nebraska,
escape a boring life.
And this is nothing against you Nebraskans. I literally knew a guy who told me that one time. It's I joined the army to get the fuck out of Nebraska. And I've been to Nebraska. I've been to an army base in Nebraska. I get it.
Yeah, no, totally. So, I think there are often people who join the military for very pure, understandable reasons. And I think a lot of boys, if they had perhaps alternative stronger alternative avenues for public service that were like seen as sort of like cool and masculine and not lame, they would probably take those paths, but they don't really exist. Anyways, I mean, my experience then as an adult with the military was covering the VA. That's how I got into this work. It wasn't covering the military initially. And I think like probably if I had like embedded as a civilian overseas or just like been at the Pentagon a lot as a civilian, I probably would have inevitably been sort of, caught up in that culture, a little bit intimidated by the brass. I think that many journalists, though, not all by any means, can sort of get a little caught up in that environment and maybe sort of not be as sort of hard-nosed as they perhaps should be. I, on the other hand, was like at the VA talking to VA patients and just hearing like a lot of, just seeing really, the many physical and emotional wounds that often accompany military service. And so that kind of fortified my skepticism of the institution. And then it wasn't really until like 5 or so years ago when I got a tip about Valley Forge Military Academy just outside of Philly, which famously schooled J.D. Salinger, also H.R. McMaster and Stormin Norman Schwarzkopf. I heard that place was really sort of tearing itself apart. There was a really nasty hazing culture, to include like pretty intense hazing and sexual abuse. And it was through my investigation, first for Mother Jones Magazine, into Valley Forge, that I was able to get some sense of how like military ideology was applied to young recruits. I mean, the book basically deals with like the officer training programs, but I think a version of this pedagogy is applied to, all enlisted people as well in basic training. And so I just became really interested in how the military, strips identity and rebuilds one.
Yeah, and that's the idea of stripping identity was always like that's kind of one of the selling points, right? Is that you join basic training, you're all your own people, and they're supposed to break you down to build you back up again. And there is certainly a bonding experience that happens when you go through something that sucks together, but like not abuse. Like there's a difference between it's really hard, we have to do this ruck march, and then we have to bivouac out in the forest for a couple of days. We got to shit in a hole. We got to eat MREs. It's going to suck. We're going to not sleep, but we're going to have a bonding experience through it because it's going to suck for all of us, but we're going to get through it. And Valley Forge, and as you kind of pointed out too, West Point is a big problem with it. But really every military institute, every one of these large military institutes that have a history, a legacy, there's always something kind of buried deep inside of there. And that's where a lot of kind of what you're talking about is. I always knew kind of on the outside what happens at these places, but, you kind of lay it all out. So let's go ahead and talk about the book is called God Forgives, Brothers Don't. Where did you come up with that name?
Yeah, well, I think that sort of those words very precisely identify the sort of like punishing dynamics that often exist in these places. I mean, a lot of men join the military for brotherhood, for, to sort of be able to show love and support and to secure community with fellow men, which is great and doesn't happen enough. But often there sort of ends up being these dynamics, especially just, up the hierarchy, where like your brothers, quote unquote, actually end up, abusing you, disrespecting you, dehumanizing you. I mean, both things can happen at once, and you can like bond with people who have, been violent towards you and be friends with them forever. So like it's all very complicated, but God Forgives, Brothers Don't was long the West Point football team's motto. They adopted it in 1996. The team used to sort of run out onto the gridiron with a flag that said God Forgives, Brothers Don't, and a big skull and crossbones. Some players had the phrase tattooed on them. It was on West Point merchandise as well.
You hate to see officers with enlisted mentality. You're supposed to be better than that.
Yeah, right.
Like you should look, that's flogging behavior. That's like we flog people for shit like that. You should not be doing that. You are a gentleman. Do not get ridiculous moto tattoos on your back.
I know. Well, everybody, I mean, certainly I've got plenty of shitty tattoos, so I can't really talk in this situation.
You should have joined the military, Jasper. You're already fitting in.
Yeah, right. Exactly. I know all I need is a Dodge Charger and then I'm good to go.
And at least 3 divorces.
But as it turned out, about 15 years before West Point adopted this motto, it had been founded as the Omerta Code of the Aryan Brotherhood of Texas, which was a violent neo-Nazi gang.
You don't like to hear that part.
No.
You don't like to hear that bit of history.
No. So kind of a curious connection and one that West Point hasn't entirely accounted for. But, I think ultimately what it says pretty clearly is that, the dynamics at places like West Point especially, which are sort of like, there's sort of a secretive societal element and a sort of weird elitism, and that can really just breed pretty terrible behavior and sort of like an especially rank hierarchy, arguably because it's largely being run by fellow cadets, fellow children, I would argue. At least if you enlist, you're generally under the care of an adult to some degree, to a greater degree, I would say. I mean, obviously, like, shit happens. But yeah, I think the environments and the hazing that spawned out of these places, in part because there's like this history and all these old traditions and all the rest, can be particularly bad. Yeah,
I'm lucky that I never really saw that, but I don't think, like, it's harder to haze like basic training troops because we're just gone in 10 weeks.
Right.
And the kind of background that comes through this like masculinity through the throughput through all of these what are they called? The military schools, like what's the collective name for them?
Service academies.
Service academies, but and we've got Valley Forge, we've got West Point, and then what's the one, the VI one?
VMI, Virginia Military Institute.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking. And all of these the stories that you're kind of telling show that like not only is this like a problem now, but has always been a problem. Even since the beginning, when they're like, just we have like these 12 invalids. This is West Point. Also, they're all hazing each other for some reason. Like it was just we got 20 people together and they're all kind of fucked up and they're just beating the shit out of each other constantly. Why don't we build an officer corps off of this?
No, totally. I mean, yeah, West Point was very dysfunctional from the beginning and like inculcated a fraternity style culture, and there's been a long historical interplay between college fraternities and military schools. They have influenced each other over American history, and yeah, I mean, you can see cases like in the 1800s, early 1900s that are indistinguishable from like Alpha Kappa scandal at UMISS in 2018. There are examples of like young cadets who are forced into really brutal underground fight clubs, who are, forced to chug Tabasco sauce. I mean, cadets at West Point in like the late 1800s had already devised 100 unique sort of tools of torture and hazing. And often this could get pretty brutal. Like dozens of cadets were hospitalized from the fight club. The administration tacitly sort of supported it. I mean, that's kind of a huge difference between frat life and sort of civilian culture, is that many administrators at these places from the beginning felt that like a certain amount of brutality was necessary to prepare, these young cadets for the battlefield.
It's that mentality of like, well, I was beat as a kid and I turned out fine. It's like, no, you didn't, because you want to hit kids.
Right.
And that same kind of thing is like, well, that was my experience. This was what I had to go through. It's what made me the man I am today. And, just not understanding that everybody talks shit behind your back because you're an asshole.
Right.
So this becomes that, self-perpetuating, self-licking ice cream, self-spinning wheel here, where you just constantly have this cycle of abuse because that's just always how it's been done.
Yeah. And so, that culture has sort of mutated and evolved depending on the conflict that America is engaged in or just got out of. There was certainly like a more noble idea of soldierdom around World War II for obvious reasons. The fact that there was a moral core to this conflict, though, certainly lots of brutality and unnecessary death as well, the bombing of Dresden, etc. But there was sort of a more like old school gentlemanly idea of what it meant to be a man and what it meant to be a soldier. The West Point, there was a whole office at West Point that like taught young cadets how to dance the foxtrot and hold like a cup of tea and to always be well mannered. And
that is still that's like that leftover kind of British mentality of officers, where you also have to be a gentleman, and these are the things that we expect out of you as a gentleman. And the real lessons that should be taught are like, gentlemen don't do war crimes. But unfortunately, the British Empire officers have been doing that since time immemorial as well. So like, once again, self-perpetuating machine here, where it's just going to keep causing the same problems over and over.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, like there's a lot of very like shallow ideas taught at these places. I mean, like, I feel like if you just are in, boot camp and then sort of rushed into active duty or whatever, there's not as much of a pretense that like you're learning these transformational ideas. It's kind of like you get the basic stuff and then you move forward. I mean, let me know if I'm wrong there, but like, because cadets are in this environment for years at a time, there is this like explicit effort by the military to really shape them into like a whole man. But yeah, I mean, they could like teach cadets how to foxtrot, day and night, but they would still have, and often, did have like very toxic, misogynistic ideas that were encouraged by the military latently, and, hence the military sexual trauma crisis that has long plagued the military. And like similarly, West Point's motto, duty, honor, country. That all sounds great in theory, but West Point has not done a great job at actually like fleshing those ideas out and trying to really sort of inculcate deep morality or sort of like interrogate these ideas. They're just kind of like bumper sticker ideology that sound good, but are sort of feel like they're mostly there for like PR purposes,
Now, you have a chapter in here called the Thayer method. And the thing that I kind of took from the Thayer method is this is kind of where a lot of this branches out from, because you start out with George Washington, the founding of the country, and this kind of discussion about like, well, we should have some kind of like place where we talk about the wars that we fought and we learn some lessons from it, and we, impart some of this knowledge onto these other people. But I've never heard about this guy Thayer. So can you talk about Thayer for a little bit?
Yeah, Thayer's an interesting character, and he's kind of been lost to history, but Thayer is basically like the godfather of West Point in particular and military education writ large. West Point was America's first service academy, and his methods that were honed there in the early 1800s were then essentially repackaged and replicated at virtually every other military school. So Annapolis, VMI, Valley Forge, U.S. Air Force Academy, they all adopt a version of the Thayer method. And, he comes in around the War of 1812. Obviously, the Revolutionary War had been won, and there had been real public desire to disband a standing army and sort of, secure peace. But then, of course, there are sort of these residual conflicts with indigenous forces and the British. And so the War Department was really keen on continuing to professionalize the officer class and also to just sort of develop methods that could instill obedience. I mean, there was a lot of like defections during the War of 1812 and the Revolutionary War. The sort of like rebellious early Americans also often found it challenging to obey orders. Like there was just kind of this like rebellious streak in early Americans that Thayer was tasked with sort of beating out. And so he develops a curriculum called the Thayer method. A major pillar of this is discipline and the sort of like cadet run hierarchy in which first years or plebes are sort of put through this year-long gauntlet of hazing and dehumanization, and they're sort of stripped of their identity so that they're primed.
Right. It's part of the method. It's not a like unfortunate side effect. It is actually like, no, the beatings are on purpose.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And then really stripping away any sort of like totems of or sort of elements of like imagination or sort of liberal arts. I mean, he gets rid of like, alcohol. He gets rid of romance novels. He gets rid of like Latin and history courses. He's just like what we would today describe as like a STEM guy. He's all about science, technology, engineering, math, hard subjects, and really sort of like keeping things black and white. He restricts vacation time for cadets. He, isolates them from their families even more than they already were. And he appoints a commandant, this guy named John Bliss, who was like really, and Bliss is sort of in charge of the cadets day to day. And he's really, really nasty. He assaults a cadet at one point, which leads to a sort of mutiny among cadets who confront there and say that Bliss needs to go and they won't suffer this abuse anymore. I mean, there were alleged like whippings of cadets. There was a cave on campus called the Black Hole that cadets were imprisoned in for periods of time. So it was like really, really bad. And, there were objections to it at the time, but basically they fell on deaf ears.
Yeah. And it sounds like, as you said, that this method is not only, created, but it's replicated throughout the years. Like as we kind of move into even more modern times, like I'm not going to say everybody that comes out of West Point is suspect, but you gotta like until you know somebody from West Point, you got to keep them at arm's length. You don't know what the fuck they're gonna do. And look, I've met some great people from West Point. Met a lot of people who also weren't so great. So I'm not trying to single you out, West Pointers, but y'all are fucking weird, and I think you know it.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a lot of skepticism of West Pointers from enlisted folks, also from like ROTC officers. Like, again, they sort of have this, I don't know if you ever heard this when you were in, but like there's obviously like the whole ring knocker thing, all the service academy guys with their class rings who like bang them loudly on tables when they're drunk. Some refer to West Point grads as like the West Point Protective Association. They're kind of like operating within the military structure to, elevate and support one another quietly. And yeah, there's just, I feel like that many have this sense of elitism and entitlement that is just kind of off-putting and not necessarily in line with their actual like skill or competence.
You know what it is? They're like the officer version of special forces, where there is this like we're over here, and like, look, I'm gonna tell you, it's really hard to get through special forces. I'm sure it's also really hard to get through West Point. I have met some real dumb SEALs though in my day, and some real dumb officers from, well, I don't know if they were from West Point. You can go to college anywhere and become an officer, but
right.
The West Pointers always got to hold that like, no, we're the special ones, we're the elite ones, we're all a little bit different. The same thing happens at any other level. Like I said, with the enlisted, like there was plenty of times you come across special forces enlisted people who are just kind of doing their own thing and not doing regulations, not being real soldiers, right? Like, and that's the thing, a lot of people will tell you that as pogues, it's non-grunts are not real soldiers, but we're the ones that show up at 5 a.m. to do PT. So like we're more real soldiers than anybody else. But this kind of hierarchy that gets like, and it's not even like, I don't know, I'm sure there are people that look up to special forces because they want to be special forces, but for the most part, it's just kind of dealt with as like this possible natural disaster that you have to work around. And I've always had that same feeling about West Point graduates too. It's like there's something, this person is going to have an idea and they're not going to let go of that idea no matter how many times we tell them it's a bad idea, and we're just going to have to fucking deal with it. And that's my experience with West Pointers. And like we said, that mentality has not stopped and is kind of baked in. Now, Jasper, you also talk about religion though, because the Air Force seems to be the real fucking evangelical group. But I have to tell you, you wrote about the Air Force Chapel. Have you ever seen it?
I have actually, yeah.
God, it's majestic.
Yeah,
I gotta say, it sits like at the base of a mountain. The time that I saw it was sunset, and it's like in Colorado. At that time, it was like the rain had just stopped, so everything was like nice and wet, and then the sun hits it. It just looks absolutely beautiful. Horrendous place from everything that I hear about it, but it looks gorgeous. But let's talk about the role of religion here. So, masculinity definitely becomes a big part of military identity, right? Like everybody, you join the army, you become a man. But where does religion play into this as well?
Yeah, well, historically, the military chaplaincy was like mainline Protestants, and they saw their work as specifically, offering pastoral care in battle, helping, basically serving as a therapist to, troops struggling, delivering last rites, helping with military funerals, that sort of thing. But there begins sort of like early Cold War era, an effort by evangelical chaplains and other sort of more like hard right Christian nationalism sects to infiltrate the chaplaincy and sort of like insert religious folk into the military officer class. And they catch a huge break during Vietnam because many mainline Protestants in the chaplaincy have religious and moral objections to the war, and so they leave the military altogether. And then suddenly there is an opening for all of these evangelicals.
Sure, the righteous sword of God Christians, not the
exactly
take care of the poor and the homeless kind of Christians.
Exactly. And, Colorado Springs is a beautiful place.
It's a cursed city, though.
It is.
I think one thing, if you search for like libertarian cities, there's a really good write-up about Colorado Springs trying to go libertarian and falling directly onto their faces. But it is a weird city to be in at any time.
Yeah, and it was founded during the gold rush as a sort of haven from vice and all, like the associated vice of the gold rush, drinking saloons, prostitutes, all of the rest. And so there's long been like a very deep religious presence, many churches and many mega churches and powerful Christian groups today occupy Colorado Springs, and there is a symbiotic relationship between the Air Force Academy and between these churches. I mean, there's also just sort of this like other less tangible idea that many airmen sort of see themselves as pious and sort of like, up in the clouds, become intoxicated by their own power and sense of like divine.
Yes, the Air Force generally huffs their own farts. Yes.
Yeah, that's a better way of saying it. And then like, of course, this culture accelerates intensely post 9/11 when, Bush and his administration sort of flirt with the idea that this is a holy war, use the term crusade in the days after the attacks. And so then the evangelical culture just like solidifies, calcifies even more. And at this point, I mean, it's hard to understand. I mean, like the vast majority of people who serve today are Christian. And that includes many just like, non-practicing
generic Christians.
Yeah. But then there's also some like really intense sects that operate.
There certainly are.
Yeah. You met some of them, I'm sure.
I have met more than a few crazy chaplains, but also a lot of really good chaplains. So
yep.
They definitely are out there. Like it's weird because I was always a reservist, so I was never full time unless I was on training or if I was deployed. So a lot of this stuff, like I never encountered, but I've always heard about. Like I've always known, kind of heard rumors that the chaplain corps is just very uber Christian. And stay away from this one because he's just trying to recruit for his church, and and there's no real checks on any of that. Nobody can say anything or do anything or have this person removed because technically they fall under whatever protections to be a chaplain. They check whatever boxes, so they get to be the weird sweaty guy that gets to show up everywhere, no matter if anybody wants them there or not. But I have had a lot of really good chaplains in my day, and they do provide as best they can, but this religious push I feel is probably more on the Air Force. I don't know if the Marines, if you're Marines, Army guys, Coasties, Navy, I don't know if you guys ever ran into this as well, but it really does seem like the Air Force has been always the real Christian nationalist kind of branch of the military.
Yeah, no, I think that's certainly true based on all the the readings and interviews.
And
I've done.
it helps that they didn't like they opened that up in like 1955. So like they just kind of cracked this new we got to move the Air Force away from the Army just because it's getting too big and it needs to be on its own. And you get a chance to really mold that from the beginning. I don't know if anybody's done that with the Space Force yet. I don't know if the Space Force is super religious or not. I don't think anybody thinks about the Space Force anymore.
Let's just have like some obscure religion, like, the Sikhs or some other like weird cult take them over.
Look, the Hare Krishnas, ever since they got kicked out of the airports, have probably been looking for something to do.
There you go.
Some nice, saffron sarongs, some singing, some dancing. Look, there's a lot of changes the Army would have to make before I'd ever join, but like, a chaplain corps of only Hare Krishnas might make me reconsider it.
Let's go.
Now, you also talk about one of my favorites things when I was growing up, the Boy Scouts. So were you ever a Boy Scout? Did you do any scouting when you were a kid?
I did. My dad was a Eagle Scout, and I had like he sort of toyed with the idea of getting me in the Scouts. I would have liked it, I think, but we just didn't have like a great troop near me. So that it wasn't on like political grounds. It was just we didn't have a great troop.
Yeah, and that makes sense. The troops that I was in, one of them, the Scoutmaster, obviously was just getting his, he was there until his son got Eagle, which was fine because we still went camping, we still worked on badges and stuff. But I never got all the way because that one kind of disbanded, and then I got a job, and then that's what I did because my job was way cooler than being in the Boy Scouts. The Boy Scouts, they didn't let you smoke cigarettes, so working at a restaurant, they let you smoke cigarettes at the age of 15. But how is the Boy Scouts kind of a part of this, masculinity push that, because so we've been talking for like 35 minutes. We're not really talking about the core of this book, which is this push of masculinity onto men everywhere, and like how the military is one of those main thoroughfares that you can take to be like, yes, this is it. I'm a man. I can say that I'm a man now. But how do the Boy Scouts kind of fall into this as well?
Yeah, I mean, these are all sort of tools for like, or different like side plots in building this masculinity. But I mean, the Boy Scouts are interesting. Initially established in England by a former British military officer, Robert Baden-Powell.
Yeah, and I want to say something from the book that really stood out for me is that he created the Boy Scouts because he was tired of the kids being inside and he wanted them to be outside again. And this is 1899 or so.
Yeah.
So like all the things that we're complaining about, they were complaining about back then. But do you know why that is? It's because the inside is nicer than the outside, and that's why we created indoors.
That's a fair point. And I mean, the Boy Scouts of America is an interesting story that I chronicle in the book, because at first there were sort of two wings. One that really like believed in the naturalism of the Boy Scouts and in sort of like encouraging young kids to get out in nature, like you said, learn different skills, have fun, create like a really pure connection to the earth. But there was also a sort of like more militaristic wing that, was sort of egged on by people like Teddy Roosevelt and other sort of like manly, outdoorsy folks of that era. And, early on in World War I, before we got engaged, the Boy Scouts actually were like sort of against the conflict. And there was like a political cartoon in Boy's Life, I believe, where it has like a scout leading Lady Liberty away from battle and trying to sort of keep, a pacifism about the country. But the political class and the industrialists who wanted to get in the war and make money exerted a lot of pressure on the Boy Scouts and were essentially able to sort of like subvert those more like naturalistic pacifist wings. There was also like during this period an interesting sort of like masculinity angle in that most people, the sort of like major symbol of America at that point was Lady Liberty. But the brass was sort of worried that this sort of encouraged like feminization of young boys, and that like women, especially like school teachers who were very much against war and tried to teach peace, were sort of this like pernicious force. And so they basically established the idea of Uncle Sam to make him the sort of like major figure or sort of like symbol of America, get a guy in the role who, very much was like pro-military. Mm-hmm. And that sort of, that transformation, that pivot was seen in the Boy Scouts as well. And, you know, I mean, ever since then, the sort of, I forget what the actual title is, but essentially like the ultimate, you know, figurehead of the Boy Scouts at any one time is the commander in chief, is the president. Like Trump technically now is the leader of the Boy Scouts. And that was a relationship established so that presidents could, you know, in their addresses at the jamborees or whenever, like keep this idea alive in young boys' minds, or sort of encourage military service so that the Pentagon always has a sort of steady stream of young recruits.
We got to keep them going. And there definitely was kind of a military pipeline. And I'm just trying to think of, like, again, because I got out of the Boy Scouts at 14, and I would imagine that they do like a lot of really heavy recruiting after that. I think one of the things that we're always told was that you could wear your like Eagle Scout badge on your military uniform. There's like the one thing that you could wear. I don't know if that was true. I never saw anybody have one. I don't know if anybody that I served with was an Eagle Scout. Maybe we were all, you know, you join the Army. That's easy enough. Becoming an Eagle Scout, you got to put effort and work into it.
That's crazy. That's a wild little tidbit that you could wear your Eagle Scout badge on your military uniform.
Yeah, I
believe it. I mean, it makes perfect sense.
I don't know where you would put it, because I've seen like all of the layouts for uniforms, and I've never seen like, this is where your Eagle Scout harp or whatever, I don't know, bird pin medallion would go. I have no idea. Like I said, certainly I never came across anybody that had one. I think we probably would have made fun of anybody who had one on.
Right.
Because like, look, if anything, Eagle Scouts are huge nerds. Like Eagle Scouts don't join the military because like they have just demonstrated like, look, not only can I earn all of these badges, but I can also put together a budget and put together a project, and I can convince other people to do that project, and I can oversee it, and I can have something at the end of it. And yes, I'm also 17. For the love of God, don't join the military. You have so many better things that you can do with your life. So hopefully not too many Eagle Scouts ended up getting caught up in that.
Well, they did. I mean, I believe like during GWAT, I'm pretty sure that it was like 15% of any West Point class was Boy Scouts.
That's West. I mean,
yeah, you're right. I mean, yeah,
like I'm talking about like out in the trenches with the boys. Not,
totally.
West Point. Like,
totally.
Jeez, a West Point Eagle Scout. God, is there a more like the only way to get more curse is they become an MP. So let's jump forward a little bit. We've been talking about a lot about history and the history of masculinity and where a lot of this comes from. So where we are now. So where are we now? And obviously I ask this in a mostly rhetorical kind of way because we can very obviously see where we are with our Secretary of Defense, who his entire thing is to be the manliest man that ever manned, and strangely failing at it in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But where are we at now, Jasper?
Well, I mean, I think things have sort of evolved in a pretty dangerous direction the last half century or so. And, you know, I think because there was no longer any sort of like moral mission, deep moral mission, or sort of guiding principles in the military.
Which, to be fair, we have not had in a long time.
No.
Like,
I mean,
this is because when you talk about like guiding principles, like we haven't had that sense. I mean, look, maybe the war that we waged in Kuwait in 91 was okay. And maybe the stuff we did in Yugoslavia was pretty okay. Because, you know, we're stopping a genocide. You're stopping an invasion. All right, sure. I can understand the arguments there. But like everything after that has been just real questionable, has never had a real mission statement to say, here's what a win looks like. Here's what our win scenario looks like. It feels like that's what opened us wide up for this kind of mentality is we don't have a mission, we don't have a direction to go, so we're going to pick one, and it's going to be the one where we have to do a bunch of push-ups for some reason.
Right. No, absolutely. I think that like the sort of purer parts of military culture have been really weakened. Like, you know, I mean, there was a time where I think the officer class was more open to self-reflection and reckoning and accountability. It's never been perfect at those things, but especially with like Vietnam, you know, and the POW MIA movement and sort of like all of this historical revisionism around sort of, you know, how we could have won that war. And there was no real sort of like closure on Vietnam or the Cold War. And then with the global war on terror, something similar happened. And you can really see with Hegseth, like he is so hellbent early in his time after being in Iraq and Afghanistan to like twist some noble story out of those conflicts. And really that is about, for him, I think, just sort of like securing his own exemplar status. He's really resentful that he comes home and he isn't universally praised for the work he's done overseas, and that the conflicts he's a part of are sort of being questioned in increasingly major ways. So, you know, for a while he does the like neocon shtick and tries to say, no, there's still hope to bring democracy to the Middle East. This is going to happen. We just need more time. And then at some point, when that argument no longer holds water, he just starts to sort of take on darker shades and argues that, you know, it was really the fact that women were being elevated over the last few years and people of color that we lost these conflicts. It had nothing to do with me. It had nothing to do with the, you know, straight white guys who went to Princeton. It's really just these others that I am going to pin the blame on, because I refuse to sort of grapple with my own role in all of this, or sort of the fact that I was perhaps naive going into this. And so he just has like a very fragile masculine ego. He's very volatile, and he's like so insanely performatively, theatrically focused on sort of like proving to anyone around him that he's the strongest, toughest guy that exists. I mean, it's really kind of insane. I mean, it's sort of been normalized like all the Trump stuff, but the lengths that Pete Hegseth goes to prove his strength are just ridiculous. And I think stem, you know, from this long history and the often impossible expectations foisted on men.
We always had a joke about how the way that you get promoted in the Army is you have to run faster than everybody else, because you had to do well on your PT test. The better you did on your PT test, the higher up you got to go. So Hegseth at the top, he's got to be constantly, you know, challenging people to say like, no, I get to maintain, like, you know, if somebody, like it's a world wrestling belt or something, like if somebody manages to out push up him, he has to give up the title to fucking Private Snuffy or something.
Right. Yeah. No, it's just such a like reductive idea of what military leadership looks like, and also just what manhood should be. I mean, and it also stems in Hegseth's part from the fact that he like doesn't actually have an advanced military education. He's never gone to the war college. He didn't go to West Point. I mean, he was a National Guard guy.
Yeah, it's like putting me in charge. You should, and look, I think I would be a better SecDef, but I mean, that's just because of how low the bar is right now. But also, I have more qualifications than he does. I've deployed more, I think, and I've, you know, wasn't an officer. I understand the troop mind a lot better than he does.
Yeah.
But also I was never a Fox and Friends host. Like that's really where it comes from. He did the military. He was real handsome on TV, and that's what we need. That's how we have a good Secretary of Defense, is that he's really handsome.
Right.
And he does a lot of steroids. That's how we know RFK Jr. is also very healthy, is the amount of steroids he does. Allegedly.
Yeah, I mean,
ain't no 70-year-old man looking like that naturally.
It has infected. I mean, obviously, there's so much talk about the manosphere and clavicular and sort of like body, you know, obsession and all of this stuff. Hegseth is a perfect avatar of all of this, but it's certainly like infected broader boy culture, the manosphere, all of the rest.
Yeah, I was telling my wife the other day, one commercial that really stuck in my head back when in the 90s. Did you remember the Just for Men commercials, like where the hair dye for guys? Yeah. There was one that was just called Touch of Gray. And the commercial goes, it's like three guys that are looking for a job, that are like trying to get a job. And I think it's the same guy, but like guy on the left has no gray in his hair, all dark hair, and guy on the right has a lot of gray hair. So the guy on the left, he's too young. He doesn't have enough experience. So now we're going to hire him. And guy on the right, too old. They don't want an old man working here doing Excel spreadsheets, I assume. But me, I'm right here. I found just the right hair dye to make me look 36. And at the time, and I think that was the first time, you know, at this tender age of probably 10 or 12 or something, when I was just like, this is kind of ridiculous. What is this guy doing? What is he so like? Is this a thing that happens? I don't think this is, because my father, and I had an older father. My dad was 41 when I was born, but he was full gray when, you know, I was forming memories of him and, you know, knew him. I've always known him to be a gray haired person. And that's never affected his ability to get jobs. He had a job. He was highly respected at his job. And thankfully also I had a father that when I would say something like, this seems ridiculous, he's like, yeah, it is. It's stupid. Like this is, and this is kind of those first like forays into like, this is what they're trying to sell you when it comes to masculinity. And I know that it's spoken about with women all the time, you know, the pink tax and how things are advertised to you. But the men have been having that, you know, very pervasively, but now it's been hitting men so hard. I don't think anybody is ready for it. Like it was starting with like, yeah, you could dye your hair, I guess. And then maybe, I guess you could have like, look, dude wipes, they're wipes for dudes. Isn't that cool? You can have a black thing of wipes for your ass. And then all of a sudden, like streamers hit the market and then everything became insane.
Yeah.
And dude psyche was not prepared for any of that. And their parents weren't preparing them by saying, look, you are special and you are different, but also you're just like everybody else. So like, don't be fucking weird with it. Just be a normal person. And then that's kind of where we end up today. And it all stems back. It's all West Point's fault, Jasper, is what we're getting at. All the ills of the world fall back to West Point.
That is my thesis, perfectly summed up. Yeah.
That is the book. You get to the end of the book. That's all it is. It's all West Point's fault.
Yeah.
Well, Jasper, where can people start buying this book? Is it out yet?
It is out. You can just search God Forgives, Brothers Don't on Amazon, and it'll be right there.
Awesome. We will have some links up there. I will also link some other books that Jasper has written and that we have talked about and that you should also read. Jasper, it's always great to have you on. I always love it when you ping me in an email because I know that it's like, hey, I wrote a book. Let's talk about it. And then, you know, score, I get an episode and I get a free book. I'm always looking. That's the entire reason I started the podcast is to talk to people about special interests and to get free books.
Well, thanks for having me.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. All those links will be down below. Follow Jasper's writing. Check out his books. Thank you so much. We will talk to you next week.